So what do we want to listen to today? Do we want to listen on how it's never late to start your new passion? Doesn't matter what anybody else tells you, you can always start something new, a new adventure? Or how to overcome hardship and be goal driven and oriented to achieve what you want? Or let's see, what's my identity? How can I find my identity? How can I fight for that thing that I love and thing that I want to do forever? Or just have laughs. Realize that I'm not there's always somebody worse than me. This and more you can listen to in my next episode. Stay tuned. Welcome back, you all podcast listeners, to lucky number 7, episode 7 of the podcast summary report. We are reviewing 4 videos today, 4 podcasts today for you, and let's get right into it. First video is The Diary of a CEO with Rebel Wilson with an hour and 35 minutes. Second podcast today is Chris Williamson with Tim Ferriss with 3 hours and 11 minutes. Followed by another long one, which is Jocko with Andrews Huberman, Dr. Andrews Huberman with 3 hours and 37 minutes. And then closing it off with JRE, Joe Rogan Experience with Chris Distefano with 2 hours and 36 minutes. All right, let's do it. Video number 1, podcast number 1, The Diary of a CEO with Rebel Wilson. So let me tell you, my opinion. This lady was just a fat, dumb actress that just got lucky. Wait, what? What did I just say? Well, that was my misconception of Rebel Wilson. But let me tell you, I love this interview. I love how Steven just got Rebel to open up and how she is not just an educated woman, a successful woman, but a woman with purpose, a woman that is driven, and a woman that is just, by all accounts, she knows what she wants, she knows how to get it, and she is goal driven. This is a short podcast, an hour and 35 minutes, not as long as you have seen others one with Steven in The Diary of a CEO. But Rebel gets to share her story, gets to share her childhood history, her father, how he was abusive both physically and also emotionally, how from his lack of being able to be successful, how that also kind of lit up a fire under Rebel, and how she was not just driven to be successful, but also driven to achieve something in her life. But it wasn't being an actress what was her first calling in her life. She actually has a law degree in Australia. That was her first calling. That was what she wanted to do first. But traveling to Africa, getting away from Australia, got her to get malaria and then have a vision. Well, this vision was to become a Hollywood actress. So now Australia, Africa, back to Australia, now all the way to LA and to America, and to how to become a comedian, let's say a fat comedian that was able to get a lot of laughs and then starting a successful career. Well, now look at her. She's now goal-driven to have a beautiful family. She's goal-driven to continue her success in Hollywood. She's goal-driven to take care of her health, her safety, and personal safety, her family safety, and everything. And now she's actually diving into directing and producing now films, which is that next level in her career. So she has a book. And I recommend it to you, but just listening to her is how she is sincere, and you could see how she's peeling the layers of the onion in her own life, and just how Steven from The Diary of a CEO is just loving this conversation. They both talk about so many different things, and her childhood, her drivenness to go to Hollywood and be successful, just every single stage of her life, and how she is now following in that path, and she just continues to grow in this new stage in her life, right? So follow her book, listen to this story, and just honestly, it shows how somebody that is driven, even when you had a hardship in your childhood and when you were young, can also still achieve success, can also still be the role model for other people, for girls, for aspiring actresses, aspiring comedians, and just being able to be smart in that moment, see how you can use your strengths to your benefit. But Rebel is quite an interesting character because it is not the character that you see in movies. She's an intellectual. She's very smart, very driven, and I admire that. It was quite. She completely eliminated what I thought about her. It's like props to you, and just very happy for this interview. So Rebel, keep doing your thing. All right, number two. Podcast number two, Chris Williamson and Tim Ferriss. So I've actually had to skip a couple of Chris Williamson's podcasts because I've been listening to Joe Rogan and PVD and Jordan B. Peterson and Jocko and others. But I remember why I like Chris Williamson and his podcast. But let me tell you, this is not a short one. This is a 3 hours and 11 minutes of with Tim Ferriss, right? So I was like, all right, Tim Ferriss, does that name sound familiar? Who's this guy? Well, he's the author of many books, The 4-Hour Work Week, The 4-Hour Body, and others. He's one of the original OG podcasters. This podcast started in 2014. And then they just get into this conversation. You can see how these two individuals, Chris Williamson and Tim Ferriss, just admire each other and like to have that conversation. It's just two people sitting and having and throwing questions back at each other and just answering in deep thought. This is a deep thought conversation, and you can see how Chris Williamson is just trying to get you to follow Tim Ferriss's life throughout his experience and throughout his success, and just in success in being an author, an entrepreneur, in podcasting, and just everything, how it's gotten to this stage in his life. So I really enjoyed this conversation, really enjoyed this podcast. Just let me tell you how the conversation started from a thoughtful, very highly thoughtful conversation to something in like a day in Tim's life. What do you start? How do you start a cold plunge? He was one of the first original cold plungers. And then what books does he recommend? What apps does he use? How does he navigate his computer in his life, his calendar, everything about those things. And then just how it tells you, it puts you in the mind of a successful millionaire, influencer, podcaster, and everything, how you can start making small little changes that'll prime you in your day and give you that next step, that upbeat step to be able to do this in your day-to-day activities, day-to-day schedule, right? So I have a lot of those time stamps, but it's just very interesting to see how they both admire each other. They both love this type of conversation. They just dig into each other. Chris Williamson would ask a question, and then Tim would just flip it back to him. And like, all right, so Tim, give me your what do you think about this? And then Tim would ask, well, Chris, what do you think about this yourself? And then would answer each other, and they would turn into a 15-20 minute conversation of that question. So, and then both really insightful and thoughtful questions. So great conversation. Finish it up all. It's come to put together about just at the very end, what's next for Tim? How does he get his next content? What is he thinking about? How not to get captured by the audience is just and just overall a message to dreamers. And this is Tim's message to dreamers. If you're starting off, if you want to do your own thing, if you want to start from scratch, do it. Don't wait for others. Just get off the ground, learn something different, get out of your comfort zone, and do it. Because this is going to be the start of your new life. When he was started in podcasting in 2014, people told him, "Oh, you're already late. You're already late to the game." That was 10 years ago. Now look at it now, 2024, people are still diving into this market of podcast, and Tim is a household name. So great conversation, great interview. I just love how Chris Williamson has upped his game immensely. It just his production, his scenario is just everything. It's just top notch conversation. So If you want to listen to it, I recommend it to you. You can break it into small chunk because it's a long podcast. You can do it while working out. You can do it by when working on a small mundane task. But it's a conversation worth listening to. Very well. Podcast number 3, video number 3 that we are reviewing today is Jocko, episode 436 with Dr. Andrews Huberman. What do I love about this podcast? First of all, I didn't love the length. It's 3 hours and 37 minutes. But, not gonna lie to you, it went by quick because you can see two friends chatting and having a conversation. The first conversation is just like pulling a thread of the last podcast that were together. And I believe in this last podcast, it was with Huberman and his podcast. And Huberman asked Jocko, hey, tell me about your identity. So this is how it all gets started, right? But in this case, not the identity question wasn't for Jocko, it was back to Huberman. And you can see how it's just a long story about his childhood, being a skater, loving punk rock, starting to research him, loving being in the lab, and just how he always felt a little being an outsider, being one of those rebels. Because when you were a skater, you were a rebel. When you were a skater, you were an outsider. So just everything along those lines, and then how he starts just becoming successful in his venue, but also in an essence, in a way, challenging the norms as a researcher, challenging just not being the same type of person. And he brings this back from being that skater, being that rebel. He also reminisces because I think that's what skating was, one of his original passions, and you can see that he was passionate about this, and he had friends that became professionals in skating as skaters, but he could never do it. He didn't have the attributes or the being able to achieve this at a high level, right? And one of his friends tell him, Andrew, we know you're not going to be a professional skater. It's not in your cards. Go do what you do best. Go use that brain. Go use that mind. And he feels that he was sad, but also it almost like took some shackles away from him, because now he was free to target what he really wanted to, what he does is research and having those conversations with others and pushing out that information free for us to be able to save our lives one day at a time. Save our lives one day at a time with one topic at a time. Either sleep, either alcohol, either drugs, either everything, supplements, whatever, because he's teaching us how to do it one day at a time. So this was a awesome conversation. You can see how two people, I almost felt that I was in a room. Echo Charles is in the podcast. He didn't say a word until like minute 30 or 40. I was like blown away just how these individuals allow each other to talk and to have that conversation amongst friends. It's just, you're listening to a conversation of friends with so deep knowledge and so much deep thought in these two individuals, and Echo Charles, this third individual. So some of the topics is, one other thing that was very interesting in this podcast. I don't know if you know, but Andrews Huberman has been doing this for a while, and he gotten a lot of recognition, but there was a hit piece out for him. There was a article that was out there to discredit him, to bring him down. And he gets into the topic of this article and how it's just so many shady things happen, and they wanted to discredit him and just bring him down from that cloud and kind of destroy him. So I don't know, people that follow him didn't think he was perfect. His biggest message is, I'm not perfect. I'm as flawed as you are, and that's why I wanted to share my thoughts and my ideas and my research with you, because what I'm striving to do is to become a better person. So that's Andrew's message in this podcast. I loved it. I'm glad that he addressed it, because it's just like, you could see how just if you're going against the norm, which I feel Andrew is, going against the pharmaceutical industrial complex, because he's giving you the information almost for free. There's just so many hit pieces out there for people that are trying to help the individual like us at a no cost. So it's just quite interesting. I loved it how Jocko was just there. Oh man, but it's just almost like throwing a couple little punches to a friend, but just lifting him up as well at the same time. But now, a lot of other things came about in that podcast, and if you want to listen to it, I recommend it. Getting control of your brain, just listening to others, just shut your mouth. Jocko, Jocko started his podcast. Now, let me tell you, there's a connection because you know who told Jocko to start his podcast? Tim Ferriss. You know who told Jocko to start it? Joe Rogan. It's just how these two OGs told Jocko to start it, and now Jocko is almost in his 500 episodes. So quite an awesome story how you can link two individuals to each other. And then finally, The Way of the Warrior Kid going to be a movie, and how Chris Pratt is involved, and how Jocko just felt so much accomplishment and being proud of a book for kids that has impacted so many different lives. So just great, great podcast. I love it. It's just I can't say so many good things about these two guys because I'll bore you. But my recommendation to you is just listen to it. Listen to at least the first hour, and you get to see just how these two individuals interact and how they bring you so much value. And then you can see if you want to stay for the next 2.5 hours. But great conversation, great podcast. Recommendation to you, yes. All right, finally, let's bring it together. Let's bring it home. JRE episode 2144 with Chris Distefano, 2 hours and 36 minutes. And now let's take it to a lighter side, right? Let's take it to a comedical side. I love Chris. Chris he is hilarious, but you could see how a comedian is just a broken brain that is willed to achieve success. What do I mean by this? I have never seen a person more anxious than Chris. And what's hilarious is it's not his intention. He doesn't want to be an anxious person. Who wants to be an anxious person, right? But he just, I feel almost like when he goes into a JRE podcast, he opens the book to Joe. All right, Joe, here I am. And he just starts talking about his stories and his anxiety. And I was like, oh. Joe's like, dude, really? I'm like, damn, have you worked on this? Have you gotten some therapy? It is just a hilarious conversation. How Chris has the confidence because he's a very confident individual. He said that himself. I can achieve whatever I want, but it's just sometimes interesting to see how I have to fight my anxiety. And he mentions that he on stage does not have a single ounce of anxiety. But once you get off that stage, boom, it all like comes in rushing like a waterfall. But I like Chris's message though. I really do. Because overall he says that one thing has, let's say, minimized a lot of that extreme anxiety that he's had. And he is going back to religion, going back to his Catholic roots and his in Christ. That just has brought a lot of calmness into him, especially as he's a father of 3 now and is growing up in that life. So great conversation, just hilarious stories. There was one of a Mets fan and how he's just bombing. It's quite funny. I really, if you like comedians, listen to this podcast. If you like, if you have issues with anxiety and these types of depressions or something, listen to this podcast because it tells you stories that you can relate to. It tells you stories that you can learn from and try to bring back into your life and just take that next step out of that cloud. Now, you know what? I love when I listen to all these podcasts and can bring you this content because if I can just push you to listen to one of these individuals, it is just you don't have to hear it from me. You can hear it for yourself. It is a great story, great topics, and I just loved it. Overall, main message of this one is how to deal with your anxiety and just have to have fun in the transition, all right? So Chris is not out of the woods yet. He's still working on it. He's actually still dealing with a massive error that he did, sold his house, went back to the city. It is just chaos. And then now he's trying to buy another house to do it back because he affected his family because of the anxiety. So you get to hear a little bit about his current lifestyle and current life stage, but hilarious. Joe is always funny. Joe always laugh. he kind of passes that laughter to you. But my goodness, Chris, oh man, you got this, Chris. You are a hilarious comedian. I love to follow you, and you know what? Keep doing what you're doing. All right, my friends, that's it. That's lucky number 7 for you. If you love it, keep joining me, and I'll keep pushing more of that content. And you know what? If you love what you see, click on any of these 2 videos. All right. So have a good one and take care.